Thank you very much, Danny, and other organizers of this, shall we call it, symposium and book launch of this wonderful book of yours. Congratulations. Of course, it is a book launch about the Green Movement, and I've been thinking what to say in this book launch, despite the fact that we see what is happening in the region. And I thought that I use this opportunity to address an issue that has been raised, a question that has been raised about whether or not there is such a thing as the Green Movement. And in the question and the discussion, perhaps we can also extend that into other, into the region in comparison with Tunisia or Egypt that Nader already has, of course, referred to. Now, of course, these days, following the Tunisian revolution and now Egyptian revolution, shall we call it still uprising? We don't know yet the outcome, what will happen, but we hope that it will be a revolution. And also perhaps because of their sort of success, one of them successful, the other one perhaps on the verge of success, there seems to be, there is also pessimism on the part of, certain segments of the Green sympathizers about whether or not social movement actually is sufficient to dislodge the regime in Iran. Maybe we should go for a revolution. So a revolution, again, is coming back in a sense. But I have argued somewhere else that, I mean, you can't just decide to do a revolution. Revolutions are not really plannable. Revolutions are not predictable. They are a very complex happening, and they have their own logic. But it doesn't mean that revolution might not really happen in the context of places like Iran. Now, of course, Green Movement is a social movement, and what has been happening in Tunisia or Egypt, it's something else. Although the aspirations, demands are very similar, but the method of achieving them are quite different. I think Green Movement has been, in my view, a post-Islamist kind of broad movement to reclaim citizenship within a sort of broadly ethical society. That is, civil, political, individual rights have been, I think, significant demand or claim of the participants and members of this movement. Initially, its expression was in the form of street politics, street demonstrations, but it's been really driven off of the streets by, in my view, really sheer coercion. The coercion that we don't, perhaps is not particularly comparable with what we see, what is happening in Egypt. I think the kind of coercion that Iran used, we saw only 2 days ago, whereas it's been quite good when you're comparing with what happened after the election of 2009 in Iran. Now, of course, the decline and disappearance of street politics, that is the manifestation of Green Movement in the street, has led some commentators and some who, in fact, are very interested in a Green Movement to question whether or not such a thing exists, whether or not actually Green Movement is dead. Of course, this is also what the regime was also saying, that it is dead for a long time. And the reason that they provide is, well, there aren't really manifestation of this movement, tangible manifestation of this movement on the street. We don't see demonstrations as we used to see them. Or they argue that this movement doesn't have really much of a structure. It doesn't have as such leadership. And they argue that what we see is not really a movement, but it is simply broad dissent, disagreement, dissatisfaction. And they argue that this has always existed. I mean, people have been angry and they have always been there. So we didn't define them as, social movement. I want to address this sort of argument and this claim that has been made. First of all, I want to suggest I'm not really sure what is the use of posing this question, whether or not there is such a thing as social movement green movement is a social movement or it is not a social movement. I think this was also raised during the women's movement, whether what we had in Iran is a women's movement or non-movement, or what is it? And I wasn't quite sure the usefulness of such a question. I think what is useful to try to find out what it is and what can be done with it, and whatever it is, that entity really can do. And I think the reason why this question has been raised is the kind of a theoretical package or the framework that those people who make this claim take from rather a US and Eurocentric model of social movement. Basically, social movement theory, American social movement theory is very prevalent, and those of us who study it, we take this and we apply it. But of course, the genealogy is pretty different. I mean, this is the movement that you have in this country has been developed in a quite a democratic, open society in which you can easily organize. We can get together like this and talk to one another. People do not come and arrest us. There is a free communication and also technologically advanced. And the reason why I'm technologically advanced is because of the possibility of the means of communication and networking. Because communication is this key to any movement. Without communication, you don't have a movement. But of course, the forms of communication have been very different. The form of network has been different. It could be in the form of print, it could be in the form of physical interaction, it could be in the form of now Facebook and new social media. But you have to have these things to build a community, a body, a collectivity. Without that, that wouldn't exist.